Tēnā koutou, nau mai, haere mai. Hello everyone, welcome to the Walking the Shadowlands podcast. Let me be your guide as we take a walk into the realms of the unexplained, of the paranormal, of things that go bump in the night and haunt your dreams.
Your hosts?
I'm Marianne. Thanks so much for joining me today, tonight, whatever time it is, wherever you're living in this beautiful world of ours. Sit back, relax. Let me be your guide as we walk into the Shadowlands together and see what awaits us there. Kia ora, hi everyone, welcome back. A special hi to all our new listeners. In the first season of our podcast, I did 2 episodes on Skinwalkers, a bit of the history and people's personal experiences. I have to admit that this is a subject that has fascinated me since I first read about them so many decades ago. It continues to have a fascination for me. So if this is a subject you also find interesting, be sure and check out the 2 episodes from season 1. In these episodes, I spoke with a woman. This woman had her voice altered and spoke on the condition of anonymity due to the taboo about talking about this subject. But she, like my guest this episode, is from the Navajo Nation and she continues to live there. My guest tonight, like my guest last episode and my guest next episode, came to my attention through a series of posts they made on TikTok. Their posts detailed a personal experience that they had with a skinwalker. Of course, this immediately caught my attention. I reached out to them, and this episode is the result of that. Speaking about skinwalkers is not something that most will talk about openly, as my guests today are. It's, as I mentioned before, very taboo and discouraged for a number of reasons, personal safety being possibly the most important reason. For some, this is a very scary and fear-inducing topic. With that being said, are you willing to walk back with me into this part of the Shadowlands and see what awaits us there? Let's begin. Meo and Isaiah are Navajo, born and raised on the Navajo Nation in Arizona. They grew up in a Christian household, but still follow the traditions and cultures of their Navajo ancestry and background. They both enjoyed telling stories and decided to remove the taboo of talking about certain creatures or stories from their tribe. Whilst they don't actively pursue paranormal or supernatural things, they do tell the stories of their encounters and the encounters of friends and family.
want to welcome you both, Meo and Isaiah, for joining me today. And my listeners, I'm really grateful to have you here with us, and I've been really excitedly waiting for our conversation. Now, for my listeners, I want you to know that I first came across this couple on TikTok, and I was really impressed with their honesty and the fact that they were putting their face out there, talking about things that are regarded as sacred or taboo or just not talked about in general public amongst their culture. Now, maybe you could tell us, either of you could start with where you're from and what your cultural background is, please, if you don't mind.
Well, first, my name is Isaiah. I come from a small town in the Navajo reservation called Navajo, and that's where I come from.
My name is Meo. I actually come from a small town, a slightly bigger town than my husband, about 30 minutes away from Kansas, Arizona. But we were both born and raised on the Navajo Nation in Arizona.
Is that near, I know there's a part in the States, they call it the Four Corners or something like that?
Yes, so we're actually about an hour and a half away from the Four Corners area, probably like an hour away.
Right.
Where I'm from is more close to the Arizona-Utah border. It's about 30 minutes away from Monument Valley. Monument Valley is a very famous national park in Utah. So that's where my dad's family is from. So I'm about 30 minutes away from there, and then he's about 30 minutes away from me.
Right. And I have heard of Monument Valley. That's the place where they have those beautiful...
The buttes, yes. They're kind of shaped like...
Yeah, shaped like waves. I was trying to just... Sorry, listeners. I was waving my arms around, and I know you can't see me doing that, but yes, all the beautiful stones that are shaped... very, very beautiful place. Very beautiful place. I was in Utah for a while, just for a couple of months learning Spanish before I went down to Guatemala. But I loved it. I loved the countryside. I loved the desert. It's just absolutely beautiful. Has a real energy and stillness about it out in the desert, doesn't it? It's just beautiful.
I'm very biased, but I agree. I think there's something, almost an otherworldly beauty from the Southwest, like being out in the desert. Honestly, for me, I don't think anything quite compares to a sunrise or a sunset there.
I agree. I went to Australia. For those who are new to my program, I'm from New Zealand, and I visited Australia a couple of years ago, and I went to Uluru, which is smack bang in the centre of the desert in Australia. The skies were amazing, and the vastness. You say an hour away, in terms of distance in the States, that's not very far at all, is it? An hour's distance.
Not at all.
Whereas here in little New Zealand, that's quite a ways to travel. Yeah. So maybe you could begin, if you don't mind, by giving us a little bit about your background and how you grew up, perhaps some of the, because I know there is so much interest with people who want to learn. Mm-hmm. So maybe you could give us some of your cultural norms that you grew up with, like your taboos, your traditions, like no whistling at night, okay. Stuff like that.
Well, I can go first. Growing up, my mom was raised in our traditional ways. Her family all grew up traditional Navajo. They grew up in the old teachings, the old ways, waking up, doing your prayers, offerings, and stuff of that sort. My dad's side of the family, they grew up Christian due to my grandmother. Growing up, my mom changed her life, became a Christian, but she's the only Christian on her side of the family. So growing up for me, I always had a conflict with being Christian and having my relatives on my family side would always criticize me for, studying or having faith in the white man's religion is what they would always say. Right. So I grew up knowing a bunch of taboo stuff, the do's, the don'ts, what to do, what not to do, wake up in the morning, what not to do, what not to say, things that I should be wary about. Like you said, like you mentioned earlier, no whistling at night. Also, you can't point at the rainbow with your finger, or else one of your fingers would be a little short. As you can see, I did that. And I have a smaller thumb. So growing up, I would point at the rainbow, and they would always say, "Don't do that." But anyways, I grew up in all that. I did grow up in some of the ceremonial ways and stuff like that. So I was always kind of conflicted between being Christian and being Native American or being Navajo on our own traditional teachings. As far as Skinwalker, don't really like mentioning that part because there was a mentioning of someone in my family who did practice it, but they're no longer here with us because they chose not to follow through. That's just pretty much as far as I can go on that one.
So for me, my grandparents on both my maternal and paternal side were the first Christians in their family as well. So I was raised in a Christian household. My grandma, my maternal grandma, she comes from a long line of medicine woman. She was actually taught to it's what they call hand trembling. It's a form of what a medicine woman does. That's what she was supposed to be taught by my great grandmother, but she didn't feel right learning that, and she declined to learn that practice. So it was years later she ended up having her own kind of near-death experience where she became a Christian. And it was sometime later, my grandfather, her husband, he was a practicing medicine man. I don't quite know what his testimony was and how he came to Christ, but he ended up becoming a Christian as well. So as far as I'm aware, he was the first on his side of the family to also end up changing faiths. For me, I didn't really have a huge kind of, I guess, identity crisis with what I believed in. I was always taught certain traditional ways, stories and stuff by my grandmother. But I guess it wasn't a huge conflict for me until I got older. And then I kind of realized that there's a lot of conflicting things between both beliefs. I think it's something that I still go back and forth with, trying to preserve that cultural identity and the traditions that we were both taught growing up, and then trying to still have that belief in God and Jesus and stuff like that.
Right. It's really difficult, isn't it? And there's a lot of conflict there for a lot of people in similar situations. Going back to what you said, amongst the native Māori here in New Zealand, they also have a tradition of not whistling at night, which I find is very interesting, that we both share the same tradition. We also have a lot of other things that are not acceptable, like it's taboo to sit on a table, to put your bottom on a table that people work from or eat from. Don't wear shoes in the house. Just lots of little things like that. And a lot of them have a basis in actually common sense. Why would you want to eat off a table where somebody's been sitting? It's just hygienic practices, I guess. But I know that there's a lot of our cultural traditional beliefs are rooted in the spiritual practices. Like I had never heard the one about pointing at a rainbow before. That's very fascinating to me. I find that's really interesting. Is it okay if we talk about, before we get on to other subjects, if we talk about some traditional beliefs? Because, I'm just like a sponge. I love to learn about this stuff, and it helps my education. It helps me to understand other cultures, and I always think that it's such a great thing to learn about other cultures. It expands your understanding, and interesting things for me, like we both have no whistling at night. That, here we are on opposite ends of the worlds, yet our native people have the same tradition.
Yeah,
we have no problem with that. Usually, like you said, you found us on TikTok. A lot of the lives that we end up doing with the people that follow us, we actually do give like little tidbits of history and things answering questions about our culture and stuff like that. It's something I personally enjoy doing. So usually my husband just lets me speak.
Yeah. So, like my wife is saying, she's pretty really passionate about that. Growing up for me, it was always told that, not told, but it was always kind of shunned a little bit for us to teach our ways to non-Native Americans, especially non-Navajo.
Right.
But I think that at some point in life, it would be interesting for other people to understand and know our culture history as well. Like you said, cultural appropriation, just so they can get a better understanding and knowledge. There's also a few other things that are taboo for Navajo as well. There's another thing that we do is hair your hair. It's sacred to us. You know, growing out your hair, having long hair. That is why, for me, I'm trying to grow my hair out now after many years of cutting it and being in the military. When your hair gets cut or if your hair falls out, we're always told to bury it or burn it, because in a way that is a way for people to use dark magic or witchcraft in some way, shape, or form. They would use your hair or any pieces. Like I said, our hair is pretty sacred to us, and we were always told to either bury it or burn our hair or pieces of clothing or personal belongings, because it can be used a way for connection in witchcraft or dark magic. So whenever someone would get their hair cut in some way, shape, or form, we were always told to burn it. I'm pretty sure everyone knows that we shed hair constantly. So growing up for me, people would sweep it up. And if we see hair, people just throw it in the trash normally. But growing up for my side of the family, we were always told to gather the hair, take it outside, burn it, or bury it.
So that was actually a thing for me too. Like I said, it's interesting because my grandparents, they became Christian, but despite being Christian, they always held on to a lot of those traditions and little things like that. So when I was growing up, I always had really long hair. So my grandma used to be very adamant that once you gather the hair that's either been shed or that you gather in the comb or brush or something, to burn it. I was also told by another one of my friends whose grandmother was a medicine woman as well, that not to walk outside barefoot as well, because the oils from the feet can be left in the imprint of when you're outside, and people who practice dark magic, or I guess what we would call bad medicine, they could use that as well to make specific, I guess, hexes towards you, because it's a personal belonging, I guess.
Oh, actually, that's a very, very valid point, and one that I hadn't considered, but that also is very common amongst other belief systems, practicing pagans and Wiccans and stuff like that. That's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's energy. It's our energy that we leave behind. So I understand that thinking. Going back to your lawn here, I remember reading an article, I think it was about, not the Navajo Wind Talkers, it was about Native men who were inducted into the army that they used as trackers. And I remember reading it was really fascinating how they were really good trackers, and then when they had to cut their hair, the army made them cut their hair, they lost that ability of tracking. It's a true thing. I can't remember where I read it. And so the army did some research, and they ultimately let these men who were specifically trained for specific missions to keep their hair long, because their hair acted as an antenna for their senses.
So like my husband was saying, our hair is very special, especially in our culture. I know it's a common thing amongst a lot of indigenous cultures. But for our tribe specifically, hair represents rain, because we live in the Southwest, so it's a very dry, arid area. So the reason why we were always taught to grow our hair out is because if we cut it, it's like inviting a drought. Oh. So we were always told, since our hair represents rain, that we're supposed to keep it long so that we can always get our monsoon seasons, that we can have that water for basically out in the Southwest, water is life for us.
Yes.
So it's crops, it's things for our livestock and such. And it's still such a big thing even to this day. Water is a huge resource out there. So that tradition of keeping our hair long is, it's unfortunately not kept too much anymore by our generation and the generations after us, but a lot of people still definitely believe that.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. I always wondered why the long hair was so significant, and the braiding of the hair has a significance as well, doesn't it, when you braid it?
Yes. So I know this is the same for a lot of Plains tribes as well. Usually they say when you're braiding your hair, you're supposed to only kind of think of good intentions or positive stuff, because this kind of like usually when you're making your hair, it's the beginning of the day. You know, you want a lot of that positivity
Right.
to go into that, you know, especially with the Navajo culture. We have this thing called the beauty way, which is very significant in our culture. So it's a prayer basically. So that in itself, if you ever listen to the prayer, it's inviting like positivity into your life, like in all, I guess, like in all ways, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, for me, from my understanding was that braiding one's hair was not really a how do you say it, like a fashion for Native American men and women back in the day. For us, it was putting our hair in a tige, which is a traditional hairstyle bun that you would see most Navajo or even some other local tribes like Hopi and them do their own versions of tige. And that's kind of the way we would do it, not really braiding.
Right.
So the Plains tribes, which is like the Lakota, Cherokee, a lot of the ones that are further up north from us, do braid their hairs is kind of more the iconic,
Right.
like braid.
Right.
So like my husband is saying, we would do what we call like a hair bun basically.
Yes.
But even with that, there's a similarity when you're brushing your hair. Like I remember when my grandmother used to brush my hair for me when I was younger, she would still, it was still part of the teaching is you want good intentions even when you're brushing it.
Right.
Even if our tribe specifically didn't do the hair braid, it was still something that was a part of
right.
the daily routine.
Right, absolutely. I run a Facebook group. It's only small. It only has about 6,000 people in it, but I'm always telling the people that intent is absolutely everything. It's your intent. Intent is what creates action, and it draws energy to you. So I totally get what you're saying. I absolutely understand it entirely. That's really interesting. And I know that a lot of the Māori men here in New Zealand also wore their hair in buns. And they have combs that they hold it with, special combs that are carved out of shell or wood. And I don't know the name of them. I wish I did. I love it. I love the buns. Love them. And they often put feathers in their hair as well. What I find fascinating is that there are a lot of cultural similarities. They're slightly different, but the basics are the same, like the hair. Can you tell me why you don't whistle at night?
Well, what I was always told was if you whistle at night, you're kind of calling out to spirits in a way, shape, or form. You're kind of inviting them in a way, and we were always told not to venture out at night due to multiple and many reasons,
right?
Including up to Skinwalkers. I'm not really knowledgeable on that, but there was quite a lot of things growing up, especially from my grandmother passing it on to my parents and to my grandparents. And not only just myself, but friends and families that I have, they would always encounter supernatural things or extraterrestrial. You'd be surprised. UFOs and sightings of that sort are pretty common, especially in our traditional beliefs and stuff like that. We were always told not to go outside. For those specific reasons, we were always ushered inside and to remain inside during the night times. As far as whistling, that's basically what I was told, is that you're inviting spirits in a way, shape, or when you whistle at night. So I was always told that we weren't allowed to do that, or we shouldn't be doing that. Right.
And what about if you hear whistling?
So what I was always told is you're never supposed to reply back. That's kind of a given. It's kind of the same thing with if you hear your name being called, not to call back or to answer. It's what I was told was that, I guess with the whistling at night, is if you whistle at night, spirits supposedly like they can't see you. It's not until like you whistle or that they know where you're at, your location. At least that's what I was told. And then as far as hearing somebody whistling at you or hearing somebody call your name at night, I was always told, like, if you don't know who it's coming from, don't answer, because it could be a spirit as well. And when you answer back, then they're able to see your location.
Right. That's really interesting. Now, the thing that brought you both to my attention was your story about the Skinwalker. Could you please share that with my audience, if that's okay?
Do you want us to talk about what a Skinwalker is, or do you want to share?
Yes, let's start with that, because I have a lot of new listeners who may not know what a Skinwalker is. So that's a great place to start. Thank you.
So for Skinwalkers, I do know that there's different origin stories based on what part of the reservation you're coming from. For me and my husband, we had a similar origin story that we were told when we were growing up, which is that Skinwalkers were basically, they're people that a long time ago, the ability to shapeshift into animals was actually kind of seen as a good thing. They were used as messengers in between small bands of Navajo, especially during the times when the U.S. Army was trying to round us up and we had those conflicts with the U.S. government at that time.
Right.
So the people who had this ability to shapeshift into animals were used as messengers or kind of like an early warning system for other bands of Navajos so that they could hide or flee, whatever they need to do. It wasn't until, I don't know quite when that change happened, but just like anything else, humans are very fallible to a lot of things like greed, revenge, jealousy, things like that. So when those started becoming a thing with the people who practiced skinwalking, I don't know if that's a verb, but it started becoming more synonymous with like evil intentions or evil intent.
Right. So skinwalkers were likened to witches?
They weren't like witches. They were basically medicine men. They were basically taught. They were taught the art of doing the shape shifting.
Right.
And like my wife said, we were back in the day bands of Navajos. We weren't a united tribe. We were different bands with different head chiefs, and yes, we would war upon one another and that sorts. But the area we grew up at, our little area, that's the origin story of how we were taught. A friend of mine who lives in the further southern area, New Mexico part of the reservation, she was told that skinwalkers basically the same way. They were used as messengers. They were also used as a way for gathering warriors in the time of need. If there were a tribe or something coming to make war upon us, and we were so spread apart that they would send out skinwalkers because they were able to travel faster, they were able to shapeshift into multiple animals to make travel up further distances. And they would be used to send messages to gather the warriors or to inform the people that such things, bad things were coming, to go and hide. I was also told from her family comes from a bunch of medicine men, and she still practices the old traditional ways. And she's very adamant on it. She's actually writing a book on being Native American in a modern world.
Oh, wow. And
how, she's coming out with her own book about how people are trying to corrupt our stories to further, modern agendas in their way, shape, or form, and how stories are being twisted to fit ideas. But she was told that skinwalkers were used for hunting as well, because game was so scarce. Not scarce, but game was kind of hard to find.
Right.
Skinwalkers would go out and locate herds of deer or locate certain animals for hunting, and they would report back, and they would send out the scouts. The scouts would go and find them, and they would use the skinwalkers too to help herd these animals to where these tribes would, or these other bands of Navajo would be able to hunt them and gather food or pelts for clothing and that sort. So that was another reason. That's another another way Skinwalkers were used was to locate game.
Oh, that's
So it's very unfortunate, I guess, where that shift happened. Like we always hear stories like this about how they were used for good intentions, but it's unfortunate we really don't know where that huge shift changed and where it became more synonymous with evil intentions.
Yeah, that's really, I find that quite sad actually, but it's also a reflection on human nature, isn't it? Whether it's done through greed or feeling slighted or whatever the intent is, that, that's really a shame. I had a question. I should have written it down, but it's gone now. Oh, in order for one to become a skinwalker these days, is it correct that they have to do some really bad stuff?
Yes. I'm not entirely sure how you would go around to becoming one or finding someone that would teach you. I was always told, and there's a pastor actually who practiced the ways of skinwalking. Like I mentioned before, I ain't mentioned it, but my dad's a pastor. He came out of some hard ways. Throughout his years of ministering, he came across another Native American folk, Navajo, who was a pastor and lives here in Oklahoma with us. His family, unfortunately, practiced that sort of witchcraft and magic. He was brought up the same way. And I remember when I first got out of the Marines, we traveled all the way back across from North Carolina to Arizona. We stopped and we met this gentleman and his wife. And I asked him the question of if the skinwalkers were real. And he was like, yes. And I was like, oh. And I was like, how does one become one? And he says, you're not taught. You don't find out. You're kind of chosen. You're kind of picked. They're kind of picked to do this. And it is up to the person if they want to continue on with trying to practice this dark magic. Yes, you would have to go through ceremonies. You would have to be brought up in it. You would have to do multiple ceremonies and bad things. You would also have to interact with, he really didn't get too much in detail into it, but he said one of the final things that you would have to do in order to fully be able to transform into the skin is you would have to take a life of a loved one, someone that you love. That is one of the final steps for you to do. You would have to do such a thing in order to fully be able to gain the capabilities of shapeshifting into a skin or whatever it is that you want to do. And he said that he did not want to do that. For his target was picked for him was his sister, who he loved dearly, and said no. And he wouldn't share with me what happened, but he did pray to God that he would be saved, that he would be protected, and no harm would come to him and his sister. And no harm did come to them. And that's how he became a Christian, because he said that God did protect him and his sister.
Right.
And that's why he's a pastor now to this day.
And that's exactly what I'd heard. I'd heard that they had to kill a loved one. And I remember reading a story about a woman and they often, I understood that they pick specific people who have abilities or they feel are particularly malleable. And I recall reading the story about the woman who was told, she was given the option, actually. She was told that she had to kill one of her children or they would kill her.
Yeah.
It's usually how it goes.
That's what I'm talking about. That's you're given the option to do so. And if you don't want to go through with it, you basically forfeit your life.
It's an ultimatum, ultimately.
Yeah.
So it's either your life or theirs, pretty much.
That's pretty horrific, isn't it? And of course, you can't tell who is or who isn't a skinwalker just by looking at them. It could be your neighbor and you wouldn't know.
Yes, we usually tell people to ask that very same question on our TikTok channel about how do you know if somebody's a skinwalker, and it's like you don't. It could be a family member, a friend, a neighbor, anybody really.
Yeah.
I would say unless you're particularly sensitive to energies, like myself, I'm a sensitive, and you can pick up different people's energies. You might feel that there was something off about that person, although you might not necessarily know what it was. you feel uncomfortable or uneasy or something like that. But other than that, the average person wouldn't be able to tell. And that's the scary thing, isn't it? That's the scary thing about it. So having that understanding of what a skinwalker is, can you please share your experience that you had?
Yes. So my experience takes place in the summer of 2017. My wife and I moved to Japan at the time, and I moved back. I was living in Arizona, back in my hometown, in Hoto. I just gotten off work. And just to give you a little backstory, before this whole thing happened, I came home from work one night, I would say about a week or maybe a week and a half before this whole experience happened. My window to the room that I was staying at, I was living in my aunt's house and remodeling her home for her due to some damages. And when I came home, the window to the room was open. And the next morning, as I was getting ready for it, I noticed that 3 of my shirts were cut. There were little square fabrics that were cut out of them. So me being Native American and Navajo, being taught our traditions, I knew that, this thing was using my clothes to gain an attachment in some way, shape, or form. So fast forward about a week later to the experience that I shared on TikTok, the one that came across. I was in bed and it was late at night because I came home and I was on the phone with my wife that night. And living in that house, there would always be cats that would walk on the roof. And you can distinguishly tell the difference between a cat and someone running on the roof. So you could hear the paws of the cats, and they would always stay at the edge of the house near the trusses. And that night I was on the phone with my wife and I heard running on my roof. And this was not just some light-footed thing. This was like someone stomping your feet, running up and down in the middle part area, all the way down towards the living room and back to where on top of the room I was at. And I was telling my wife about that. I was like, hey, I hear someone running on my roof. And I don't know, could you hear that, Annie?
I didn't hear the footsteps on that he was talking about, but I remember he did mention a couple of days prior that his window would be open and he was hearing like loud bangs around the house, as well as the footsteps on top of the roof. I didn't personally, I'm still kind of skeptical about things like that. So I was always like, oh, maybe it's the cats. And I remember that night he was really adamant when I was on the phone with him. He's like, it's not the cats. It's not the cats. I know, like, they only walk on the edge of the roof. Like, whatever is up there, it's running all over the roof. He's like, you can't. He was getting frustrated with me that I couldn't hear what he was at that time.
So as I was explaining to my wife all this that was going on, I had a lot of guns in the house. So I heard some commotion going off in the back of the house. And it sounded like an animal that was being attacked in a way. So I told my wife what was going on. I got up. And the first time I left my phone, right? Yeah, I left the phone in the room. I went out to the back and I grabbed my shotgun because we live in the middle of nowhere. God knows what the hell it could be outside. Right. So I grabbed my shotgun and I would have something called buckshot, which is nine really big pellets inside of a slug. I had that. I went outside and when I opened the door, immediately to my right, I remember seeing this big black figure, and it wasn't solid. It wasn't a solid black figure. It was almost
like opaque.
Yeah.
Like a smoky.
And it was kind of translucent. And I remember seeing it mauling on something. And it was about 5 feet from me. I took aim with my shotgun, and I know a lot of people were saying, oh, maybe you missed. No. I was a Marine. I know how to shoot a rifle, and I wasn't going to miss. I shot whatever this thing was. It immediately dropped what was in its mouth and it took off. And when I went to go pick up what it was a cat. And I've seen this cat around the house. I saw her laying there, and by the door, we have a water barrel. And on that water barrel, there was an aluminum takeout tray. So I scooped the cat up in that and I put it on top of a refrigerator that was outside. And a lot of people were skeptical because I said it was 9 feet tall. If you go onto the reservation, you're going to have people that have a lot of junk outside their house.
Right.
And this refrigerator was sitting on top of things as well. So it was pretty high. And I put this tray on the very top of it. And I went inside to go get my phone. And as I was getting my stuff, I heard something again outside. And I was on the phone. I grabbed the phone with I grabbed my phone and I went back outside and the whole tray was gone from how high I put it. The whole thing was gone. And I was telling my wife, I was like, the tray's gone. And she was like, what? And I was like, no, I was like, the damn tray's gone. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, there's no way whatever it was could have grabbed this thing. Cause I'm about close to 6 feet on 1 inch side of 6 feet. I stood on my tippy toes and stretched my arms all the way up to put this thing on top of it. So this thing had to be pretty significantly tall to grab this tray off of this refrigerator. And I went back inside. And do you remember anything from this side, honey?
So from what happened with that, because like he said, when he first went out and he initially saw the black figure attacking the cat, he dropped the phone in the room. So I had no idea what was going on. I was freaking out because that's when he heard the cat crying out, basically, and it was being attacked. And I had no idea what was going on. So my husband was like, I'll be right back. And he ran out. So he just left the phone in the room and he came back in a couple of minutes later and he was like, something attacked the cat. And I was like, oh, like what happened? And initially, like my first reaction was like, oh, it's probably some stray dogs that are out there. And he's like, no, he's like, I saw this big black thing. He was like, it almost looked like a wolf. And he was like, it's really large. He's like, I shot it, but it ran off. So I was like, okay. I was like, what did you do with the cat? Is she still alive? And I remember him telling me that she was still alive and that he put her in the tray. So what he told me was he put her on a barrel. That's what I remember. I think that's probably like the main difference we had in our stories was he put her in a barrel or on top of the barrel in the aluminum tray. And then he came back in to grab the phone. So when he grabbed the phone, we both heard a loud thump. So we're like, what was that? That's when he took the phone. We were on a video call. And when he opened the door, he was like, the tray is gone. The cat's gone. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, I put the cat right over there. And he was like showing me on the phone. And he's like, I put her in an aluminum tray. So I was like, what? I was like, okay. I was like, is a tray anywhere? Did something grab it? Thinking like maybe it was the dogs again. I don't know. Just trying to make sense of the situation. But he's like, no, he's like, everything's gone. So he's like, I'm going to go grab my other gun. So he had an AR with him and he went back in. And when he was headed back outside to go look for the cat again, the tray was beside the door. It was there was a little blue barrel that was right beside the door. So right when he opened it up, the tray was right on top of it again. And I remember my husband was like, the tray's back. He was like just completely shocked. And I was like, what are you talking about? So he showed me and it was just sitting there. There was no cat, just the tray. And my husband, when things freak him out, that fight or flight mode thing kicks in. He is all about fighting. So he was like, I'm going to go find it. I'm going to go out and see what it is. Because at that point we were just like, we think it's taunting him. Like, oh, I got the cat and I'm bringing the tray back and things like that. Honestly, if I wasn't on that video call with him and he wasn't showing me these things, I probably would have not believed him. But since I was there kind of just along for the ride on the phone call, it was really hard to believe everything that was happening that night.
Yeah. So like my wife said, I went back inside to get my AR-15 and I went on to put my plate carrier, my body armor on, and I grabbed my my pistol as well, and I put that on. And during this whole time, there was 3 loud bangs that happened at the front door. And I went to go check what it was, and there was nothing. And there was another 3 loud bangs that happened at the back door. So I ran back to the back door, and there was nothing. And at this time, I was still trying to put on my boots, my stuff, my equipment, and I heard the bang again. But this time, instead of running through the house, I decided to go around on the outside to catch to see if this was. My initial thought was that there was either someone playing the game on me, or if this was something out there, maybe I would cross paths with it outside.
Right.
But nothing. And then the 3 loud bangs happened again at the backside. So I ran around on the outside and the front, and they came around. And then I went back inside. I finally finished getting all my gear, and I think I grabbed the phone at that point.
So yeah, he had the phone with him, and he was wearing like the plate carrier, which is kind of just a vest. So he had like a little pouch that was kind of sitting up front on his the vest he was wearing. I'm gonna say vest, sorry.
On chest, yeah.
Yeah. So he put the phone in there, so whatever he was seeing, I could kind of see it too with the camera.
Yeah. So at that point, I had everything on, and I was ready for whatever it was that was being outside. And I had my weapon was loaded. I remember going outside the back door. I remember going back out. Huh?
Sorry. I don't mean to cut my husband off, but I remember when he was doing this, he was going outside. The moment he stepped out the door, there's he's in a very rural area, like very few neighbors around him, but there was one street light that he has that's kind of up front. So when he walked out the door, like I said, the phone was kind of nestled on his chest. So I remember he stopped and he goes, I see something. He's like, it's right there. Do you see it? And he was pointing towards the lamp or the street light. And he was like, there's something kind of just on the outside of the light. And he's like, can't you see what I'm pointing at? And he was getting so frustrated at me because I couldn't see what he was seeing. But that's when he decided to go walk in that direction.
Right.
Yeah. So this is before all that happened. I remember walking outside, and I had my rifle, and on the chest piece was where the phone was. And that's when I came outside and I started looking around. And that's when, like my wife said, off to the back of the house, there's a street light, but it's one of those crappy, cheap ones where the light is orange. You can barely even see shit with that thing.
Right. Yeah.
So, right at the edge of the light, where the light kind of really stops, there was this really dark figure just sitting there. I'm talking about if you look outside and you see black, this thing was darker than that.
Black, right.
And I could see it.
Right.
And I was telling my wife, and I was like, it's right there. I was like,
It's watching me.
I was like, it's looking at me. Yeah. And I was like, you can't see it? She goes, no, I can't see it. And I was like, no, it's kind of playing in my mind right now. And I was like, it's right there. It's right there looking at me. And she's like, no, I can't see it. And that's when the smell hit. It smelled dead. Vomit. It was just so overpowering to the point where I was starting to tremble a little bit. I'm starting to tremble a little bit right now. I don't know if you kind of see it.
Yeah.
And I was like, honey, it stinks. I was like, I don't know what it is. It stinks. And I was like, it's so overpowering. And I started starting to puke a little bit. I was like, I was just like hurling, and I was like, I can't. I was like, it stinks so bad. And then I remember kind of laying down, and I don't really remember much, but I remember hearing my wife say, go inside. And I was like, I can't. I was like, I can't. And then my vision started getting blurry to the point where, like, I couldn't focus on anything. And I remember just laying down on the side, and I was like, I can't move. And my body was just so exhausted. I don't know if anybody's ever like worked out to the point where you start to see bright stars and you're just kind of like dazed out of it. that's how it felt. And I was just laying there and I was like, I can't move. I can't move. And my wife, I remember her screaming, go inside, please go inside. And I was like, I can't. I was like, I can't. I was so close to blacking out.
Wow.
And as I laid there, that's when I heard something chanting in Navajo. I mean, I can understand Navajo, not fully, but I couldn't make out what it was saying. And as I was laying there, I was like, if this is how I'm going to end, if this is how I'm going to die, I was like, I am not going to die without a fight. And I remember willing myself, drawing as much energy as I can to move. And it took a tremendous amount of effort to even try to crawl. And I started crawling towards the back door, to the back door. And then finally, when I passed the threshold, I had to wiggle myself like a worm to the back door. And I used my foot to close the door. And I just laid there, breathing heavily. And I was just laying there trying to recover from this. And there was three loud bangs again at the back door. And I thought it was going to come inside. And there was nothing I could have done to have stopped it if it did. I had no energy. I had every ounce of strength left in me was gone. I just laid there. And, oh, Jesus. I can't really explain. I wish there was a way I could make people feel how I felt, just the pure exhaustion, the fear that I had in me, but I can't. And there's no real way I can put it in words for someone to understand. I don't remember much from there. Do you remember anything from that area?
So kind of backtracking. When he talked about how the smell hit him, just all the stories that I've heard about. You have to take a sip at that moment.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So just backtracking to my husband, when he was talking about the smell, it was kind of like all those stories I've heard about skinwalkers just all came flooding back. And my husband can tell you this too. Anytime we've heard of skinwalkers and stuff like that, they always say that it smells like death. Like it smells like rancid, rotten meat. And the moment he said that, and then I remember he said this, he's like, I don't feel so good. I feel sick. I was just like, no, like, I remember in my head, it's like, nope, like I'm so skeptical of these things, but even I didn't want to chance it. And I remember talking, he was like, just go back inside, leave it alone. And he wouldn't, because he always has to go. And like, I don't know what it is about him. He will not back down. He has to go out and he has to confront whatever it is. And so I couldn't see him. The phone was still in his chest, but that entire time I remember him saying like, oh, my head's hurting. I feel sick. I feel like I'm about to throw up. And I remember him telling me like, oh, I feel lightheaded. And he's like, oh, I feel like I'm going to pass out. And I remember when he was saying all of that, I was like, just go back inside. And I felt so helpless. Like my husband said, He was back in Arizona. I was in Japan, and just watching this whole scene play out, he says he can't remember this, but I remember I was yelling at him just to get back inside because it was freaking me out so much. Mm-hmm. But I remember watching the phone go down as he was laying on the ground. And I was like, just crawl into the door. And every time I talk about this with him, he's like, I don't remember you saying that. He's like, I can't remember you saying that. And I was like, I was yelling at you to just get back inside. I remember he started crawling. I could see the light from the house when he was getting to the door and stuff like that. And he was probably, when he finally got back inside and he closed the door, he was probably laying there for about 5 minutes. And I was like trying to talk to him. Like he said, I think he was just like exhausted, like just spent. And he wasn't talking to me. So I was on the phone with him that entire time until he was finally waking up or coming to. And he started, like, it was kind of interesting not watching him, but hearing him on the phone as he was finally, like, it was almost like he was in a trance in a sense, like that energy or whatever was attacking him was like suddenly just wearing off, and it was like he was waking up and finally coming to, in a sense, and then finally he was answering me back and stuff like that. And he was just like, I don't know what happened. He was like, I just felt like so sick, like I can't. And that's when he was like, I can't explain how it felt. And he was like, and that's when he was asking me, like, what happened? Like, and I was trying to explain, like, my side of the story of, like, yelling at him and stuff like that. But after he came to for a while, he was still, like, it made him mad. It made him mad that whatever was out there had that kind of effect on him. So he told me, and we're calling him stupid for this, that he was going to go back out there again. And I don't know if you want to pick up where I left off from there.
So, like my wife said, after finally being able to gain somewhat sort of my consciousness back, like my strength was starting to come back, and I was asking my wife what happened, you know, what was going on, and she basically tried to summarize what was going on, and thinking about what happened and how this thing was able to do something like that to me and not have the balls to do it to me face to face really pissed me off. Mm-hmm. And I was like, sorry if I'm in the cuss, but I was like, this motherfucker is not going to have that last laugh on me. If I'm going to die, I'm going to at least do whatever I can to hurt this thing. And it's going to know that it can be hurt. And it's going to know that people will fight back. And I remember my wife was like, you're stupid. You don't go out there. Don't do this. I was like, nope. And I was like, my mind's already made up. I remember grabbing my rifle and I was standing at the door and I was like, hyping myself up. And like I said, you know, I thought this was going to be like my final moments, my little blaze of glory. But I remember opening the door, and majority of my instincts from my military training kicked in at that point. I opened the door, everything zoned out. I wasn't even caring to listen to my wife. My focus was finding whatever this was, and I was going to put as many rounds as I could in it. I drew up my rifle, I opened the door, and I ran out. Had my rifle up, and I remember exactly where it was sitting at. And I went straight running for it. And there was nothing.
Mind you, at this point, when I did call him stupid for going out a second time, he hung up on me. So I was freaked out.
Oh, yeah, that is right. I did hang up on her because she was trying to do everything she could to get me from not going out.
Inside, and he would not listen to me. So he hung up on me. And he said, I'll call you back. And I remember waiting on the phone for him to call me back because I could not fathom why he would do it all over again.
I ran back outside and I ran where I remember seeing this thing was. I ran straight up to it, full sprint. And I was dead set on finding this thing. Wasn't there. I went running around the house, running around the edge of the property, and nothing. I remember walking back, and it was just quiet, peaceful, as if the last few minutes never happened.
Right.
And that's when my neighbor came out and saw me standing there, dressed like I was about to go into battle. And he was like, hey, what are you doing? I didn't want to tell him. I didn't want to mention anything because he probably thought I was a weirdo. But I asked him, I was like, oh, you know, just walking around. And then he's like, did you feel something? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I was sleeping, but I just randomly woke up not too long ago. He's like, there was a strong, negative, bad energy, and I woke up. And this side of the family, they're my relatives because mostly everyone where I'm from in my small town is related to me in some way, shape, or form, through our clan systems or through blood. So this side of the family, they're really traditional.
Right.
Grew up into old traditional teachings. A lot of their families still go to these ceremonies. And he said that he felt something really bad, negative, dark, and it woke him up. So I proceed to tell him my story about what's going on. And he just didn't say anything, didn't flinch, just listened. And when I was done, on the Navajo reservation, you hear a lot of people make fun of people that have these experiences because you get some people that make it up, lie.
Right.
And in our native tongue, we say, "Oh, Jine," which means, "Oh, he said, she said."
Like,
oh, it's just make believe.
Like rumors, gossiping.
Mm-hmm. So I was expecting a response from him like that, but he just looked at me. He's like, "That's a Skinwalker." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "That's a Skinwalker." And he was like, "Whatever it was wanted you, but it couldn't. It failed." And he was like, "My family could do a protection way ceremony." Mm. And like my wife and I said before early on, it's conflicting being Christian and being traditional.
Right.
I didn't take the ceremony. Maybe I should have. I wanted to. But my belief in Christ and believing that he's the one that could protect me, I didn't. And after that whole thing, I went back inside and I called my wife to let her know that I was alive.
That's when he ended up telling me what his neighbor had said. And we talked about it too, like the whole the conflict and stuff about doing a ceremony and things like that. And like he said, his dad is a pastor and stuff like that. And our best protection at that time was like, we'll just pray about it.
Yeah. So my wife and I that night, we prayed for the house, prayed that everything would be all right, that I'd be protected. And I slept like a baby that night. Woke up the next day and went to work.
But that's not even the end of the story, because 3 days later, his brother came to visit him, and that was a whole nother thing.
That's a whole nother story. But the morning that I woke up, I went outside to go to work. And I don't know if you remember seeing my little crappy drawing I did on TikTok about what was on my hood. That was on my hood, but drew in blood, dry blood. You know how like when you see blood and it starts to crust up and flake? Mm-hmm. Yep. And there was a feather on there. I looked at that and I was like, whatever. I just wiped it off, took the feather, burnt that thing, went on my day. 3 days later, I don't know if you want to hear this part of the story as well.
Please, no. This is...
So 3 days later, my brother he's a bit of a drifter, and sad to say he's an addict. Was with my family and my mom and dad, who were living on the Apache reservation in Civic, Arizona. My best friend from high school, I won't name his name, was living there as well. He was on his way home he lives where my wife lives. And it's only 30 minutes from where I lived at the time in Den Hotel. So my oldest brother, not the oldest, but the third oldest, wanted to come home. So he jumped in with him, decided to come home. But he ended up getting arrested because he had a warrant for his arrest. So he got tossed in Holbrook, Arizona. So my friend made his way by himself to where I was staying at. He was going to drop off his clothes, and we were outside. We came inside and we were just talking and chatting it up. And we went outside, and my brother's clothes were in the back of the truck. Not inside, but in the back, the tailgate area. My brother's clothes were all over the place. As if someone, you remember, I don't know if most of your listeners on podcasts will know anything about Jeepers Creepers.
The movie.
It's Jeepers Creepers. It's an old film.
You said that, the movie.
Yeah, the movie, yeah. Do you remember when he goes and they're like, there was someone outside sniffing your clothes, like, and he was enjoying it too. Remember his clothes were all over the place?
I never actually saw that movie, but I'm sure that some of my listeners have. Yeah.
Yeah. So my brother's clothes were all over the place, as if someone was sifting through it, looking for something, throwing his stuff everywhere. And my friend and I went outside and we're like, what the hell, you know? So we started gathering up everything, and
so pretty much when they were gathering everything up, they noticed that there were some articles of clothing that were still missing.
Yeah.
So this entire time, him and his friend had walked inside was probably about 5 minutes or less. And then when they decided to come out and get his brother's clothes from the vehicle. But after they had collected everything, they went back inside. And I believe when you guys came back out, on the vehicle were the two articles of clothing. One was one part of a glove, and then another part, a pair of socks that were left back on the vehicle. So we talked about it, and we were thinking like maybe whatever had visited him previously was probably trying to look for his clothes and realized it was his brother's, and just ended up bringing it back because it wasn't good to him.
Yeah.
Or just letting him know that he hadn't finished with you yet.
That could be, yes.
We had a lot of people who kind of said the same thing when they were listening to our stories.
Yeah.
But there was actually a little bit more we found out about the drawing that was left on the hood of our car. So this was after, maybe like a week after we posted our first TikTok video with my husband's Skinwalker experience. So I was talking to my brother-in-law, and he comes from a long line of medicine men. So a lot of the family members on his side, they work with like drawings or how do you say, like the meanings of them and
symbols,
such.
the symbology.
Yes, symbols, yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So they do a lot of their medicine with that. So he took the picture of what my husband drew, and he showed it to his dad. And his dad told him that he had seen that symbol before. So his story was that my brother-in-law's grandmother had a cattle ranch maybe 30 years ago, at least before my brother-in-law's time, before he was born. And the grandmother was having a lot of cattle getting mutilated, a lot of mysterious deaths, or like some of the cattle were just like completely like cut up basically. And the dad was working with his mom at the time, the grandmother, and they ended up coming across one of the windmills there. So it's kind of just like this big water trough. And he said that symbol was drawn there in blood as well. And they don't really know like the true meaning of what it is, but they said that the intent behind that symbol is just like very evil and very like malicious. So when me and my husband were talking about it, we were like, maybe it's taunting us or telling us that it's not finished with him.
Yeah. I would say that would be my gut intuitive feeling. And blood magic is never generally done with good intent. Oh, that's really interesting. Do you have any, and I could see when you first started talking, Isaiah, I could see how it when you started talking about the smell, I could see the physical reaction hit you, how it still affects you to this day. How horrific that must have been for you. Do you have any idea why you might have been singled out?
So there's actually pretty interesting story about this. And I don't know if you have the time for me to tell you about it.
Absolutely do. Yeah.
Okay. So like I said, my grandmother, my dad's mom, was the first Christian in her side of the family.
Right.
And she was what we would call a prayer warrior. So she would pray, and she's had one of the gifts of the spirit of being a prayer warrior. Mm. And not a lot of people liked her for that reason. What she was told was that the devil could not specifically hurt my grandmother. So he was going to hurt her children to get to her. So my dad had an experience where he had a random cut in his stomach and was being chased by a black figure. We lived in Phoenix, Arizona. I was but a baby, not even a year old. My mom told me how he came home one day and was just freaking out, like almost schizophrenic. Looking outside, closing the doors, telling him to close all the windows, lock all doors. I was saying, they're coming to get me. They're coming to get me. My dad was a huge alcoholic. And whenever my mom was trying to feed me my infant meal, my dad was like, don't feed them that. They poisoned it. He's like, they're after me. They're going to get me. So my mom, we didn't have a vehicle, had one of her friends, or I think a relative of hers, drive us all the way back to the reservation. It's a 6-hour drive in the dead of the night. Wow. And my dad was like, it's following us. He's running after us. He's the only one that could see this. He ended up at the church in Den Hozo. It's an Assemblies of God church, Trinity Assembly of God. The pastor there, who is my grandfather, not really my blood grandfather, but clan-wise, my grandfather.
Right.
And they were praying for my dad. And they took him to the hospital not too long after that. And the doctors said that they did an x-ray on my dad, and there was a cut in his stomach that was bleeding. And they don't know how this cut happened.
Internally,
yes.
Oh.
And he was bleeding, and they couldn't stop it. They said they couldn't do anything about it. So my mom was praying, and the entire time she was praying for my dad, she didn't eat, she didn't sleep, she didn't drink no water. But my dad would wake up every now and then from laying down from his sleeping, and would point to my mom and say, he's standing right there. And he's looking at me, laughing, mocking. And my mom would go over there with the Bible and she'll start praying. And he's like, he's over here now. He's over here. And I don't remember exactly how. I remember my mom sorry. And she said, finally, oh man, that was really anticlimactic, but I can't really remember what she said. But finally, my dad snapped to and said that he's right there. And my mom was like, in the name of Jesus, you devil, you get out of here. And she said all this thing. And my mom said there was like a rush of wind in a closed building, a rush of wind, and the window up on top opened and something went out. They both felt it, like a rushing wind of something leaving.
Right.
And my dad was like, he's gone. He left. And he was like, close the window. So my mom closed the window. The doctors came back to, do an evaluation on my dad. And the big cut that was in his stomach where he was bleeding was healed. Just a fine line scar inside of his stomach.
That's very interesting.
And he was discharged that day. And my dad became a Christian. And, he still meddled with alcohol and whatnot. Never really fully became submersed in Christianity. It wasn't until years later that my dad became a pastor. And it's kind of ironic, my dad being a pastor. And before my grandmother passed away, my grandfather, who was the pastor of the church, was telling my grandmother, he's like, your son is going to be a great man of God, but you won't live to see it. Whatever it was trying to stop it from happening by targeting you, but they couldn't do it. They failed to get you, so they went after your kids. And they knew that, I guess, my dad wasn't becoming a great man of God, so they tried to hit him. That failed. And before my grandfather passed away, he looked at my dad and was like, they're not done. Whatever it was that couldn't get your mom, tried to get you, but couldn't get you. And looked at my dad and said, they're going to get your kids. Your kids are next. Anything they can do to get you to break your faith with God, and your kids are next. So in my way, when people say, do you know why you were specifically targeted? I personally believe whatever it was trying to hurt me to hurt my dad.
Right. So you feel it was like an intergenerational curse that had been placed on your family. And that's not the first time I've heard about something like that, actually.
And the interesting part about it is, if you go into my TikTok, there's a Skinwalker story about how they try to get my grandmother.
Yeah, I was just about to mention that.
There's a story on that. My wife's the one that told that story. It's called Maud's story, Maud's Skinwalker story.
We can talk about it here too.
Yeah.
But I personally really like this story. It's one of my favorites.
If you want, I can tell that story too.
Yes, please.
I will tell it.
Okay. Well, my wife wants to tell it.
Oh, you two are so cute.
Like I said, it's one of my favorite stories. Like, I remember when he first told me the story, it literally gave me goosebumps. So his grandma Maud, like my husband was saying, was a really, really powerful Christian, really big woman of God, a woman of faith. And she was going to a revival that was happening on the reservation. And usually it's kind of a big thing, like during the summer, like a lot of people will come, and it's just a big tent outside, and, you'll have somebody giving a message, and, people are invited up to give testimonials and stuff. So my husband's grandma was coming into the revival tent, and somebody had recognized her as she was being, she was in a wheelchair at the time as she was being brought in. And she stood up and she was like, "Is that Ma Totichitney?" And his grandma was looking around and she saw this lady, and she's like, "Yes, it's me." And this lady, she starts just talking, and she was like, "I was sent after you. And
I was sent to kill you.
I was sent to kill you." So she ends up going into this big story about how it's actually very interesting, because we talked about this later. This is the same house that my husband had his Skinwalker story in. Very same house. And like I said, that street light that we were talking about where he saw the black figure at, it's very easy to spot where his grandma's house is at because of that street light. So this lady who was talking to his grandma Maud told her that one night when they were sent after her, they were using that street light as a way to locate where the house was at. So we were always told that Skinwalkers work in pairs. So it was this woman and another Skinwalker. They were sent after his grandma. And they said, as they were coming up into Denahoto, they saw this street light in the distance. So they just started running towards it. And they said as soon as they got close enough to where the light was at, it disappeared. So they would look around and they would see the street light in a different location. So they would run after it again. But they said that, and the woman was saying that entire night, those two Skinwalkers were unable to get to the house. And before the sun ended up rising, they left that night. So they ended up coming back the next night, and this time they were able to get to the house. So as the two Skinwalkers were walking up to the front door, the lady said that they saw this extremely handsome, beautiful man, just dressed in white. I think they described him as one of the most beautiful people they had ever seen. And as they were walking up to the house, the man spoke to them, and he said that they were not going to enter that home. And since he was at the front door, both of them decided to walk to the back of the house and use the back door. But they said as they got to the back door again, this man popped up again. And this time he had a sort of flame. So he ended up drawing it out, and he told them that they were not going to enter this home. And I believe they tried multiple ways, like windows and stuff, but that entire night they were never able to get into that house. And I don't know how that woman came to become saved or how she ended up turning away from that life as a skinwalker. But she ended up giving that testimony to his grandma. And to me, when he was telling me his story of his skinwalker experience, I think it's because that home was protected like that, like it was prayed for, and there's protection from his family, from people who love him, friends and stuff like that. That's why it wasn't able to come into the home to, I don't know, to do whatever it was trying to do to my husband.
That's pretty cool. That's really, that woman recognized your grandmother and told her what was going on. Wow, that must have been an amazing feeling for your grandmother, actually.
Yeah, it was. My aunt's actually the one that told me that story, because it was my aunt Jeanette, was the one that was pushing my grandmother into the tent, the revival tent.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So it was my aunt. And the house that all this took place at was my grandfather's. He was a World War II veteran, and
he also has his own story of a skinwalker, which is kudos to him, because if you hear the story too, you'll just be like, man, that guy was a huge badass. But totally off subject.
But yeah, he has his own. But yeah, all this took place, and my aunt lives in that house now, and they don't experience anything there, from what I'm told. I go back periodically to that home, but I'm not afraid to walk around outside.
Right.
I'll walk around outside still, because a lot of people ask me, they're like, are you afraid to go out at night? Are you afraid to do this at night? And I always tell them, I'm like, no, my mom's a pastor. My dad's a pastor. They got a direct line to Jesus, and they pray to him to look after me. And I'm not the best of Christians by any means. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody, but I will pray, when I'm walking around, I'll say, hey God, it's little old me here. Just ask for your protection, to put your blood upon me, and whatever it is that want to cause evil or harm on me, may they fail. I'm in your hands. If whatever should happen happens, it's your will. Whatever you want, there's nothing I can do against it.
The thing I have with this is he provokes things. He goes after things. And he is always talking about how he has all these experiences. And he goes actively looking for stuff like that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's aggravating because I tell him to just leave it alone. But I don't know why he has this need to, I don't know what it is exactly with him, but he always has to provoke or challenge things. But
warrior. It's the warrior is what it is.
But we do always get that question about why we talk about skinwalkers, because it's very taboo in our culture.
Yeah.
Or why we even share paranormal experiences if we believe in God and stuff like that. But me and my husband are very different in our way of thinking. It's going to be a little nerdy, but the quote I always use to kind of explain why we talk about it is from Harry Potter, where Dumbledore is talking about Voldemort, and he says, fear of the name increases fear of the thing itself. So for me and my husband, talking about skinwalker, the way they say talking about skinwalkers, they're able to know you're talking about them, or it gives them strength, it gives them power. I think fearing the name and fearing talking about it gives them more power than anything. So the way me and my husband feel about it is, if we're going to make this less taboo in a sense, we don't want to give them any more control over our lives by fearing them, especially with a name.
Yeah, absolutely. While I'm not part of your culture, I do come from a spiritual perspective. I'm not religious, but I do believe in a higher power, and that attitude is a brilliant attitude to have. Fear, you cannot live in fear. That's no life. And living in fear is just giving them your power. It's just giving them your power. That's a really great attitude. And I can see for you both how it must be such a clash of your traditional beliefs and your personal beliefs. But there's no reason why there can't be a blending of the both to a degree. It's what you're comfortable with, isn't it? It's that's really amazing. So how long ago did this happen for you?
2017.
Oh, so it's fairly recent, and you've had nothing since.
As far as Skinwalkers, he hasn't had any more experiences.
No.
And then we have had a few things here and there as far as we don't really know, ghosts or spirits, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. He has had some things happen since then with that.
No, that doesn't surprise me at all. And the feeling that I get as a sensitive is that part of the reason you're targeted is because you have abilities yourself.
Probably, yeah.
And it's a familial thing.
It's kind of interesting because actually there was one thing I did want to mention with the Skinwalker story too. So my husband really never fully explained how the black figure looked. Do you remember? So he would always say, oh, it just looked like a big wolf or a black wolf or something like that. And I was like, I just kind of left it at that. He never told me before that it was like smoky or kind of like see-through and stuff like that. A week after we ended up posting the Skinwalker video, his Skinwalker video, I ended up having a dream, which was really out of norms for me. It was kind of like I was sleeping by myself in our bedroom, and my husband was out here in the living room, and I had a dream that we were back home. I know it was on the reservation. I'm not quite sure where, but we were in our truck, and for whatever reason, there was an issue with our truck, and we were pulling like a trailer. So we stopped and we pulled off on the side of the road. And I was standing in front of the headlights, just kind of looking around as he was checking out what was wrong with the vehicle. And when I turned around, just in my peripheral vision, I saw this silhouette of I don't want to say like a wolf, but it was like a large dog, like black, but I could see the light from the headlights streaming through it. So it wasn't completely solid. It was like what I explained it as, it was like a smoke almost.
Like a shadow.
Pretty much. And I was trying so hard to yell for my husband because it was watching him. It was only watching him. And I was trying so hard to yell for my husband. And I felt like I wasn't making any noise or any sounds, but it ended up turning and facing me. So it walked up to me, and this thing is huge. I remember because we have a truck, and just the shoulders were like the almost level with the hood of the vehicle.
Oh.
And when it came up to me, its head, I remember it stopped like right in front of me, and I was paralyzed. Like I couldn't move, couldn't scream or anything. And not long after that, I ended up waking up, and it took me like a moment to kind of get my bearings right. So I ended up coming straight back out here, and I asked my husband, I was like, could you explain what you saw again that night? So that's when he started like going more in depth of his description of what he had seen that night. And I was actually, I didn't ask you yet. I ended up telling him, I was like, this thing you saw that night, I was like, was it like this big? Was it like see-through? Like you could see like light through it, almost like kind of like opaque and stuff like that. Like I was explaining it to him, and he's like, yeah, that's it. I like before then we'd never really gone into depth with the description of how it looked, but it was weird that what I had seen in my dream was what he had experience or what he had seen with that Skinwalker experience. It was strange for us, I guess.
My wife isn't one to really have really bad dreams and really get scared of them.
Right.
But she came out and she was scared. And I could just see it in her. And I was like, what happened? I was like, did you have a bad dream? She goes, yeah. And I was like, you're such a weenie, is what I said to her. And then that's when she started to describe what I saw that night. And I was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, that's literally what I saw. And she's like, and she told me the dream. And I was like, this thing's not done.
A lot of people ask us if we have experiences here, since we live in Oklahoma away from the Navajo Nation. But what I was told about Skinwalkers is usually they're tied to
that area,
the Four Corners area. Mm-hmm. So we always talk like, oh, what if when we go back, the things start back up again? Is it because we're off the reservation, these experiences aren't happening anymore? So it's kind of sucks because all our family's back in Arizona on the reservation. So, it's unfortunate that it's kind of one of those things that's like, oh gosh, what's going to happen next?
That must be a bit anxiety creating for you, Meo. Not so much for you because you just, brave it out. But for you, it must create anxiety. Yeah.
It definitely does. Yeah. And I always tell him not to provoke things and just to leave it alone, but he never does. It was kind of, we always have talks about this stuff too. I've had like weird like dreams that I've had people try to interpret my dreams and stuff like that. It's kind of one of the main things that is for me. But my sister was talking with my grandma after we had posted the Skinwalker story. I was expecting to be reprimanded, to be honest, because like I said, it's a taboo subject and we don't talk about this very often. But my grandma was telling my sister that we do come from a long line of hand tremblers, the medicine woman. So she was saying, even though I didn't learn that, we still have that on our female side. So after my sister had mentioned that, I was like, maybe that's why I ended up having that dream where I could describe what my husband had seen.
Can you please, sorry to interrupt, can you please explain what a hand trembler is? Like in New Zealand, in the Māori culture, I come from a long line of matakite. That's people who have sight, people who are spiritual sensitive and can see spirit and stuff like that.
So unfortunately, because I was raised in a Christian household, I don't have like a deeper understanding of it. My parents didn't really teach anything as far as like what medicine men and medicine women do.
Right.
But my understanding of hand tremblers, the way my dad explained it to me, just in basic terms, was it's almost like a crystal gazer, but instead of like having like a crystal in front of you, usually they work with they can work with like ashes or bones.
So it's like a form of divination.
Yes. So what he told me that they would do is they would lay a hand over the person they're doing the ceremony for. And as they're doing that, they'll do like whatever they need to, and they'll get like the messages, I guess, through the ashes or through the bones or whatever they're working with.
So that actually is like more, they're feeling energy. So that's like there's a term for that, clairsentience.
That's a better way, because my grandma, when she was learning how to do this or get this ability from my great grandmother, she would explain the feeling she would get was it was too much for her. Mm-hmm. She felt like she wasn't in control of that, and it scared her, which is why she told my great grandmother she didn't want to do it, which is why my great grandmother became the last person in my female line to be a hand trembler.
Right. Okay, so that puts a whole different spin on it for me, like from a non-cultural perspective. I would say that you probably have that ability, and it's a spiritual gift.
No, please don't tell me that.
But you know what? I get a lot of people in my group who have spiritual abilities, but they scare them. And generally, the thing that scares them is that they feel that they will have no control if they allow themselves to acknowledge this gifts. But you come from a Christian perspective. And so I would say to you, would your God not give you gifts to help other people? He provides, these are gifts that he's given you. And from that perspective, gifts are given, like these sort of gifts are not given for us. Our abilities are given to help others, to help heal them, to help counsel them, because doesn't God work through us?
I guess where that conflict arises is because I was always taught like that's a form of witchcraft.
Yes,
is what I guess what I was always raised to believe. So going into that, or like wanting to look in more in depth of what a hand trembler does, or medicine man, medicine woman do, I've always been like that's not something we do because that's a form of witchcraft.
Oh yeah, and I understand that perspective, because I have a sister who's a minister, and that was what she was always taught. But she also has these gifts, and it's not until she got into her late 60s that she finally accepted that this is who she is, and that it was actually a gift and not. Because she's as religious. Her and her husband are ministers. They've been ministers for like 50 years. But I look at it as it's an inherent natural ability that everybody has. Like you get quite strong gut feelings about things.
I think he would listen.
Yeah, and that's you can call that intuition, you can call that gut feeling, but it's part and parcel of that gift. And that's not evil. That's not. And I understand. I'm not trying to downplay your religious beliefs at all. Please don't get that idea.
No.
But I hear this so many times. And in fact, in my own personal life, it took me years to overcome the religious guilt that I was going to go to hell because I had these abilities and I had to be evil. No, I'm not evil.
I think, that's where that conflict comes from, because I have a curiosity of what they did or what they do. But what I was always told was from my brother-in-law, because like I said, this is the one that explained the drawing, the symbol. So his male side, they are what they call roadmen. That's the one that interpret the symbols and stuff like that. So what I was always told was if you have somebody who is targeting you, like Skinwalker or anything like that, you would go to see a hand trembler first, because if it's some kind of hex, or I guess like that's the best way I can explain it, like a hex, or it's some kind of like I guess almost like voodoo, where they use like personal items,
right.
Things kind of. So if they're causing ailments and stuff like that for you, they're able to find the location of where that's at, like the bundles and stuff like that. They can give you directions on where to find it so you can get rid of it. So
what they do is they track the energy back.
Pretty much. Another thing that I was told they do, because one of my good friends from high school, her grandmother was a hand trembler as well.
Right.
So people would come to her if they were having pains and stuff like that. And from what I was told is that when she's practicing, she'll find bone fragments. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times when they talk about skinwalkers causing ailments or targeting people, they use bone fragments, and they say like they will put it into like this. It's like into the body basically.
Right.
So like if somebody is having like headaches, maybe they'll have something like in the base of the head, or like shoulder pain, like they'll find bone fragments there, remove it and stuff like that.
Right.
And then with my brother-in-law, with the roadmen, usually they're the ones that perform ceremonies like the enemy away ceremony or protection ceremonies. So after you are finished seeing the hand trembler, usually you can go to get one of the ceremonies done from the medicine man. And yeah.
That's
so I guess there's that, the medicine woman and then the medicine man that you would see.
Right. That's really interesting. So how has this left you feeling, both of you? How do you feel now about the whole situation?
Talking about it brings back the experience of it. As far as letting it control me and being afraid of things, no. I'm still going to be the same person that's going to be walking around 3 o'clock in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Good for you.
Not phased, not scared.
Yeah.
I'm like I tell most people, I'm not brave. I'm not some person who's claims to be, unafraid by anything. I do feel fear, but I don't let that fear
stop you,
control me.
Right.
I push that aside. And when I get scared, I get angry. When I get mad, it's like I have no control over it.
Right.
And that's the part that takes over. And I want to confront whatever it is. And it's kind of dumb because it's like spiritual. It's like, what am I going to do, But that's just me. But I don't know about my
I
life.
will say, going on with this, he has tried to kick a shadow figure before.
Yeah.
So you've seen shadow figures as well.
He has.
My wife and I first started dating, and I was sleeping in her room with her, and I like to sleep towards the door because if there was something that was to come into the house,
right,
they got to deal with me first before they get to my wife.
Oh, that's sweet.
So I would sleep, and my feet was off the edge of the bed, and I woke up randomly, and at the foot of the bed, right by my foot, there was this tall black figure just watching us. And the moment I woke up and looked at it and realized what it was, I threw my foot to kick it. And I try to get up and try to ready for a fight,
Yeah.
And my wife woke up.
I woke up when he was mid-kick, and I looked at him, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" And I was like, "No, what are you doing? What are you kicking for?" And he was like, "There was a shadow figure watching us at the edge of the bed." And I didn't see it, but him, I literally woke up when he was mid-kick. That was a strange thing to wake up to.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And it just disappeared. And you never seen it? Did you ever see it again?
No.
It was just a one-off thing?
We really don't have too many stories of apparitions or shadow people too much. But for me, I guess what I usually hear, it's kind of interesting how you talk about it. It's feelings or sounds. And we talk about, this is getting so off topic from the Skinwalker, but
hey, it doesn't matter. I'm happy to go wherever you want to go. Honestly, this is so interesting.
So when my husband was in the Marine Corps, he didn't, first of all, let me just mention, he didn't believe me, and he's the one that always has the weird experiences, but he kept brushing us off. So we had just gotten married, and I moved out to North Carolina, and this was our first home living together. And he was constantly working. He was either gone for a week, 2 weeks, a month, things like that, because he was getting ready for a deployment. So I always tell people it was like I was living alone. But at that time, we had one cat. We had probably only been living there for maybe a month or two.
Yeah.
I was sleeping in the dining room because we were poor. We didn't have that much furniture. And I remember my cat was walking into the living room, and from where I was at on our mattress in the dining room, I could clearly see him, and he is a very chill cat, doesn't react to anything. Dogs didn't faze him, things like that. He was very chill. And that was the first time I had ever seen him react to where his hair was standing up, and he was staring at something on the stairs. And I feel so bad about this. So I pulled him back. And I was just sitting in the dining room with him. My husband was supposed to be coming back the next day. I thought maybe I had just imagined the entire situation. So I put my cat back in the living room. And first thing he did was hair was standing back up again. He was looking at the same place on the staircase. So I ended up packing up my cat and we stayed at his work until he came back the next morning. But since then, it was kind of like a feeling in that house that something at the top of the landing was there. And I would tell my husband this often because when we finally moved upstairs to the master bedroom, I would leave a crack in the door because my cats can go in and out. So we ended up having 2 cats at that time. And there was always a feeling that something was watching me through that little crack in the door. And it was just a super unsettling feeling. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until
before we get to that.
So
my wife and I, we used to argue a lot.
We had an argument.
And, we had an argument, and I went to go sleep in the spare room, which is right across from the main room. So my wife was sleeping in there, and there was no furniture in the spare room, just carpet. So I went in there.
He was sleeping on the floor.
I was sleeping on the floor, and I had the blanket, and I was laying there, and I was so mad at my wife. And it was in the middle of the night. The door opened, and I was just laying there, and I was like, man, what does she want? You know, I'm not going to talk to her, whatever. I'll just ignore her. So I remember just laying there facing towards the wall.
And he covered his head?
Yeah, I covered my head because I didn't want to talk to her. But something walked. You can hear it. And you can just feel the presence of it. And it just stopped. And it was just standing there. And I was laying there half expecting my wife to be like, hun, you know, like nagging me until I finally get a response from me. But nothing. This thing just stood there. And they just turned around and walked back out. Wow. So the next morning.
Actually, no, he didn't mention this to me for a while. The next morning, He was so mad, still he didn't bring it up. It wasn't until we actually had moved out of that house.
Oh, yeah.
He was like, remember that night you were having an argument and I slept in the spare room? And I was like, yeah, of course. So he was like, did you come to check on me? And I was like, no. I was like, I never even bothered you that night. Like, I didn't want to talk to you either. And he was like, that's when he told me about the whole thing about he heard somebody open the door, walk towards him, stand right there, and then felt them leave. And he's like, are you sure? Like, you weren't trying to talk to me, trying to bother me? And I was like, no, like, it wasn't me. But after that, because that whole time he thought it was me. And we had never spoken about it until after we left that house. And the time he finally believed me was, we had another argument. I went to go stay with a friend of mine about an hour away. So the cats were with him and he was home alone. And he was getting ready to go out to the field again for about a week. So the amount of gear he had probably equates to like 80 pounds of gear. Wow. And he had it at the top of the stairs. And this is like the landing and the stairs go down. So we had a wall right here and it was all pushed up against the wall. So he went to go take a nap before his friend came over to take him to their work site. And maybe like 30 minutes after he had fallen asleep, everything came tumbling down. And his first instinct was maybe it was the cats. So he went looking for the cats and they were hiding behind the water heater. But like when we were talking about it after that had happened, it was like, how would they have moved 80 pounds worth of gear down the stairs? And that was funny, like his inkling, like, oh, maybe my wife was right about something being here, because there was like weird things, just the feeling and stuff like that in that house was just really, it started turning oppressive almost. And I used to tell him that I think whatever was there was more attached to him than it was me, because I didn't really feel like that oppressive energy or anything like that. But he started having more of a mental change, which was some like the reason why we had so many arguments.
Right. Sounds like he was influencing your behavior. That's very interesting.
So another thing my wife failed to mention was the first thing that rolled down was the gear. There was also my sea bag that had more gear. After my gear went rolling down the stairs, I went looking for the cats because my initial thought was maybe it was the cats.
Right.
But the cats were downstairs with me, hiding behind our water heater in a secluded area.
Yeah.
And I was like, why
they
are
were
they
freaked out?
Yeah, they were scared. And I was like, why are they hiding? So this time it was nighttime. It was night. And I went walking back to the front. And that's when my sea bag comes flying down the stairs. Boom, hits the landing. I called my friend. I was like, bro, pick me up. I am not staying in this bitch.
And then I came back 30 minutes later, failed to mention any of this, and I stayed in that house alone. So that was also
That's awful.
So another thing too that was interesting about that house was because his uncle was always had cats around him, and he would always say that cats can see spirits or sense spirits, and they ward off evil.
Yes, they absolutely do.
So we had 2 cats at that time, like I was saying, and all the time they would lay on top of me. One would lay on my legs, and the other would just lay on my chest, and that's how they slept almost every single night. So I would wake up in the morning, and those 2 would be on top of me. It wasn't until we moved away from that house and I moved back to Arizona when he deployed. I was living with my family, and my cats, they never slept on top of me again. Mm-hmm. It was really interesting because I told them that too. And I was like, I think they knew something was there, because after I got back home to Arizona, like, they would never sleep on top of me anymore. So
yeah, cats are very sensitive to, they're very protectors. I had a similar sort of incident here in my house. I'm very sensitive to energies, and I was sitting here in my office working on the podcast actually, and it got really, really cold. And I thought, oh, it's just getting cold, because it was winter, so, I just assumed it was the cold. And my cat that was in here with me walked out to my kitchen, just through the door over there, and came back, and I didn't think anything of it, and it just got icy cold, the cold that just goes right through you. And the cat went back out to the kitchen again, and it started hissing. Now, I've had this cat for 5 or 6 years. I've never once heard it hiss. Mm-hmm. It was standing out there, hackles fully up, hissing at whatever was standing in my kitchen. And that's when I realised that I had a negative entity in my home, and I got rid of it. And as soon as I got rid of it, the cat went back to normal. And, yeah, cats are definitely spiritual protectors, and they were obviously protecting you. How wonderful is that? Look, I'm really aware it's getting very late where you guys are. You must be getting tired. Can I just ask you one more question?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know anything about it. You said that star people are quite an integral part of your culture. You've, alien extraterrestrials.
Oh. We have so many stories. We could talk about little people too.
The reason I say that is because I've been an experience in my entire life of star people.
Like I said early on, from what I said about us not being able to go outside and to stay inside when it's dark, extraterrestrial, yes. Have we had encounters with them? Yes. Are there stories of our past and our history long into our ancient? Yes. We were always told when I didn't live, when I was back home on the reservation, I was living in the New Mexico part of the reservation in a little town called Crown Point. I had a friend out that way. Like I said, she's the one that was telling me about the Skinwalkers being used to hunt game.
Right.
Her family was really traditional. And there's a mesa in Crown Point that is notorious for having lights, having objects there. And she has a grandmother that lives by this little ridge butte area. And she was always told as a kid by her grandmother, and her grandmother was always told as a kid by her grandmother, that when you see these lights, go inside. Mm. You don't bother it. You don't interact with it. You just let it be. Sure, maybe a sheep, cattle, horse may be gone and disappeared, but that's fine. They would always say, go inside. don't bother it. You don't. In Navajo term, it's iya, which means scary, or bahadsit, which is don't bother it. You just leave it.
Yeah, or like don't talk about it.
Yeah, don't talk about it. Just don't.
Right.
So my hometown, my mom has a UFO story, and not just her. There's actually a lot of people in my community that saw this big oval football looking object that went over our community. And when my mom told me that story, I was like, yeah, right. So I went around and asked a few people in our community, and they're like, yeah, like we saw this thing bright as day in the middle of the night. This big football object flew over, hung around, and then vanished. Mm. And there's stories of such things happening long before modern world with Native Americans.
Yeah. So one of the things too, because we were talking about Monument Valley earlier. So we have a lot of old like petroglyphs.
Yeah.
So one of the stories I was always told is they would call them sky people.
Yes.
So we were told that at some point, I don't know if it was our tribe specifically or maybe the Anasazi, but they had help from these people, the sky people. So there are actually handprints that are we have sheer cliffs. If you look at the buttes from Monument Valley, they're very sheer, some of the drops. And there have been handprints almost in the middle of these buttes. And it's like, how would people back then, would they suspend themselves or would they build a ladder? Like, it doesn't really make any sense why these handprints would disappear right in the middle of these cliff faces.
Right.
And it's like, wow, like what is the purpose of it? Who did it? It's just something we don't know, but it's just really interesting to know that these things exist and we can't fathom like how they even got there.
Yeah.
And it goes into saying about a lot of people I'm pretty sure a lot of people are familiar with the Anasazi, the lost tribe of the Southwest.
I did mention we had a story about this too.
Yeah, I have a story about Anasazi, and I want to post it on TikTok, but just not yet. The Anasazi were a traditional tribe, ancient, long been around that area long before our tribe had been there.
Right.
Been there long before the Apache. Been there longer than any other tribe that has been there. No one knows what happened to them. We do have a clan system for Anasazi, but in modern world now, even long before modern world, that clan's dead. Mm. It doesn't exist. No one bears that clan or anything, not even just us. Apache, Hopi, Pueblo, Zuni. You have a couple of other southern tribes. I don't remember their names. You have Yapa, you know them. They have similar clans for Anasazi, but no one is gone. It's an extinct clan.
Yeah.
A lot of people like to theorize that maybe they just kind of integrated with the other tribes in the area. But like my husband was saying, for the Navajo, for us, like, we don't know what happened to them. Yeah. As far as the Hopi, the Apache, like the other surrounding tribes in the southwestern region, nobody really knows what happened to them. But the artifacts and things that were left behind for us specifically, and I know it is the same for a couple of the other neighboring tribes with us, is we don't touch their stuff. Mm. It's cursed, is what we would say. And
the funny part about that too is their ancestral homeland, nobody lives there.
Yeah.
There's no one that occupies their ancestral home.
So they're known as the cliff dwellers. So, yes. So like a lot of the very popular home, like almost like Adobe looking homes that are carved into the cliffs, that's usually the Anasazi. But a lot of natives don't. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of like we're talking about that conflict of a Christian upbringing, but still learning tradition and culture and stuff like that. even though me and my husband were raised in Christian households, we were still brought up that if you see like anything that belonged to the Anasazi, like pottery, arrowheads, things like that, or their dwellings, like not to go in there because it's cursed.
And I actually have a story of being a kid growing up and taking a piece of pottery.
Right.
So would you like to hear it?
I'd love to hear it, please. Yeah.
So I lived in a small town called Lucachugay Community, Lucachugay, Arizona. We went to like boarding schools, community schools and stuff like that. And not a lot of Native Americans at the time had degrees to become teachers at these schools. So a lot of the teachers were non-Native, white mostly, that would come and teach at these schools. So the story I'm about to tell you is about such teachers, two of them, that befriended my parents through because they were Christian as well. And there was no actual Christian church in Lucachugay that was Pentecostal. Right. So my family, those teachers would get together every Sunday and have service.
Oh, actually, it's really kind of interesting. Since you're talking about pottery, I think on one of your other podcasts about Skinwalker, one of the ladies had picked up pottery.
Yes.
That's actually what it made me think of. And I was like, I don't know if I would have associated that with Skinwalker, but I think to me, that's why I actually sounded more in lines of thinking of something that belongs to the Anasazi compared to that.
Right. And she saw a big owl as well or something.
So owls actually for us in Navajo, the owls are bad omens. Uh-huh. They're messengers. And usually if you see it during the day, people will say it's usually a sign of death or like somebody in your family, close relative or things like that is possibly going to pass soon and things like that. Same with a coyote crossing your path.
Oh, wow.
I don't personally think that. I think they're just animals and they're really cute. But a lot of people are very superstitious still about things like that.
Okay. So anyways, back to my Anasazi story. I was a third grader, and this was like, I think around 2002, 2003 era. We lived in a small town called Lucachugay, Arizona, which is border of New Mexico and Arizona, right along the Chisca Mountains area. These teachers were non-native. They moved there to teach at this middle school, and our families got together for Sunday services because there was no church, but they held their own services in their own home. So they wanted, one of the teachers were very outdoorsy. Like I'm talking about having the hiking boots, but the shirts and the really high shorts and whatnot, and glasses. So they were big into hiking and exploring. And they were like, is there really nice places? Because they wanted to see some of these cliff dwellings and stuff like that. Like my wife mentioned earlier. We, from what my parents thought, we went to a place called Zuni, Arizona. My dad said he thought that this cliff area belonged to a Navajo tribe because we did do cliff dwelling as well. We were taught that by the Anasazi. Right. If you go to one of our hiding places that we did for the United States when we were at war with them, Canyon de Chelly has quite a few cliff dwellings. Navajo Mountain has quite a few of them, and a couple of other places. But we were taught that, we learned it from them. And my dad thought this place belonged to a Navajo tribe, but it wasn't. We got there, we started exploring around, and my dad knew where we were and was like, no, And I was a little kid and I knew about the stories and whatnot, but there was this pottery I found on the floor, had sand on it. I kind of brushed it away and it just looked so pretty. The design on it was it caught my attention, my eye, and it looked so nice. And I didn't want to say anything to anybody. I picked up the pottery, I put it in my pocket. At the end of the trip, we went back home. And I was just so fascinated by this thing. And that's the first time I saw a small shadow figure watching me. And as the days went by, I didn't tell anybody I had this thing. I started seeing this such shadow figure more frequently. It would run by, it would just stand there and stare at me. And I was wondering why it was doing that. And I was getting scared of it, not knowing what it was. And then I finally told my older brother, he's a year older than me, what I had. And the first thing he did is he just looked at me and was like, "You're stupid." He was getting mad at me, smacked me behind the head, and was like, getting really upset with me. So him finally convincing me to tell my mom what I had. I told my mom, and after a pretty substantial beating, I was shunned for doing that. And I remember we went back to where I picked this thing up. And we offered offerings like tobacco, sage, and a couple of other things. And I had to apologize. I put it back where I found it, exactly where I found it. I put it back, covered it back up, and we left. And I've never seen one of those little figures, shadow figures, ever again.
Wow. When you saw the figure, did it scare you? Was it a scary, oppressive feeling?
Yeah. It wouldn't be close. It would be far. Mm-hmm. And it would just stand there and stare at me. And it's like, I would look and I would like look around and see to get someone's attention to see if they could see what I was seeing. But by the time I would look back, it was gone.
Right.
I would be laying in my house, not my house, but my parents' house. I would be laying in my room and I would look down the hallway and I would see it run across.
Right.
And it was letting me know that it was there.
Right.
Until I returned it, offered up offerings and apologizing. I never saw it again.
Wow, that's very cool. Well, that's the first one I've heard from your area. I have heard in other parts of the world, like in Hawaii, when they take stones from the volcano, they have bad luck and stuff like that. So I'm not sure what department it is there, but they keep getting these letters sent back to them with stones in them. That people have taken as souvenirs because they've had bad luck or bad issues. So that's not
interesting that you mentioned that, because when he says he saw a little shadow person, we have stories about little shadow people that my mom told me before, is that they're very mischievous. And if you don't offer them, when you see them, what I was told is you're supposed to give an offering of food. And usually if you offer food, they'll leave you alone. But if you don't, they'll give you bad luck. So it's kind of interesting that you mentioned bad luck.
Oh, that is interesting. That's really cool. Well, look, I could speak to you guys for hours. You're just so interesting. And but I'm so aware that we've been talking for nearly 2.5 hours now. And I know it's really late there because it's 7:30 at night here in New Zealand, so it must be like nearly 3:00 in the morning there. Yeah, so I'm going to end this now. But look, thank you both so very much for coming on our show today and sharing your experiences with us. It's been a really interesting and a learning conversation for me. I know I've learned a lot from both of you, and I'm sure that my listeners will have as well. Now, before we do close, you're on TikTok. Can you perhaps give my listeners your social media names so they can follow you and check you out themselves?
Yes. My name on TikTok is RezneckBet. That's REZ_NECK_BET. My Instagram is located on my TikTok page too. So if you click on the Instagram icon, it'll take you to my Instagram page. And if you cannot find me, my profile picture is a Native American with Nicolas Cage's face on it. And the other name for it is Che Cage. That's CHEII, Cage, CAGE. So if you look those up, you'll be able to find me.
I'm assuming that the Nick Cage has a significance, huh?
Yeah, no, not really. I just saw Nicolas Cage looking like a native, and I thought that'd be really funny too, because he's a white person
Yeah.
with a native. I thought it'd be hilarious to use that as my profile picture. A lot of people are like, "Is that Nicolas Cage?" I'm like, "Yes, it is." And I tell them, I'm like, "It's my grandpa," and they're like, "What?" I'm like, "No, he's not really my grandpa." It's something to get a laugh out
I
of.
have to confess, I never noticed that when I saw the picture. I'm going to have to go back and have a look at it now.
Yeah, go look at it. It's funny.
And how about you, Meo?
Same thing. You can just follow me on my husband's Instagram. I think at this point we've kind of been telling both of our stories on there. So if you want to hear anything else we have on there, you're more than welcome to just follow my husband and have a listen.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I know I look forward to your little updates that you put out. I'm really enjoying TikTok. I have to say, my kids think it's hilarious that I'm on it because I'm so old and I'm on it. But yeah, it's really cool. So I'm really glad I came across you both. It's been a really awesome conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's close to 3 a.m. where you are, so I really appreciate your staying up this late to talk to my listeners and I. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you for having us.
I want to thank Meo and Isaiah for sharing their experiences with us all, especially since they stayed up so very late, or rather so early in the morning, so we could have our conversation. I understand that for them to share what they have openly and so publicly actually is a very brave thing to do. I appreciate them immensely, and I also really enjoyed listening to them and seeing them interact together. They're a very cute young couple, and I absolutely wish them all the best in their continuing journey to help educate us all on this subject. Coming up next episode, I have a most interesting UFO case, one that my guest was involved in as a child when a UFO crashed, yes, crashed, in the swamp behind his mum and his aunt's homes way out in the country. How his mum was threatened by military and government officials who turned up to clean all the debris and take the ship. They threatened his mum that they would remove him from her care if she did not go along with the official story that they put out. This is a fascinating story, one you won't want to miss. This episode's bumper music is called Native American Spirit. I love the native flute in it. It has such a beautiful tone. If you enjoy our podcast, then please consider becoming a patron. Just head over to patreon.com/MCC15 and sign up now. As a patron, you get early access to the podcast episodes and a special members-only page on the podcast website that has bits which end up on the digital cutting board and some good bits as well. And you can download full written transcripts of each episode, and you get my absolute appreciation and gratitude. Patreon.com/MCC15. Check out our Facebook page, Walking the Shadowlands, our Instagram feed of the same name, and our Twitter feed at Shadowlands10. TikTok under walking_the_Shadowlands. Like and follow for teasers of our upcoming episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a positive rating and don't be shy to leave a written review on your chosen podcasting platform or on the podcast Facebook page, Walking the Shadowlands. And of course, so you don't miss out on any episode, make sure you subscribe on your favourite podcasting platform. This podcast is available on all free podcasting platforms, including iHeartRadio and Pandora as well. Also, if you have Alexa, simply say these 4 words, "Open Walking the Shadowlands," and Alexa will play our latest episode for you. If you have any questions or any comments or anything that you might like to share with me, you can email me at shadowlands@yahoo.com. If you don't have a smartphone, then you can listen to the episodes from the podcast website, www.walkingtheshadowlands.com. For those hearing impaired, there's a full written transcript of each episode on the website, so you don't miss out at all. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your workmates about our show. Encourage them to listen and to subscribe also. The more, the merrier. Thanks for listening to this episode. Ka kite ano, oia koi. I'll see you again.
Thanks for listening.